Hi everybody, I'm Pia from Stitches and Scraps.
Today I'm going to show you how to make this layered mandala. We Crochet sent me the Brava bulky yarn for this project. I'll be using Solstice Heather, brindle, and denim. Start with the brindle color. Chain 2 or make a magic circle and chain 1. Work 6 half double crochet in the second chain from your hook or in the magic circle. Join with a slip stitch and fasten off the brindle color. For a neater finish, you can use an alternative join. Instead of joining with the slip stitch, fasten off first and go ahead and pull that yarn out so you're completely fastened off. Now insert your hook into the next stitch. Either direction is fine. Grab that tail of yarn that you just fastened off and pull it through. And then we're going to bring the yarn back down through the center of this last stitch, and I like to tuck it under one other loop in the back as well. So we brought the yarn back down, and what that did was it made what looks like the top of a stitch on top as the joining instead of a chain. Go ahead and tighten your magic circle if that's what you did, or later on if you've got a center that cannot be tightened, you can use this tail to sew it shut. For the next round, we're going to be working with the Solstice Heather color in the third loops of our half double crochet. So this is the front loop and this is the back loop. When you look behind the back loop, there's a third loop right there. That's what we're going to be working into. So go ahead and join your Solstice Heather with a slip stitch in any of the third loops. It doesn't have to be where your join is. Now that slip stitch join counts as the first chain, so we don't need to chain up any. We're just going to work 2 half double crochets into the third loop of each stitch around. So there's 2. So we had 6, and by the time we're done with this, we'll have doubled that and we will have 12. And I'm working over the tail just for a little bit, just so that it secures it and it's less floppy. So there's 4. Now make sure you're not working into that join. That join disappears, right? So we want to work into this stitch as the next stitch. Oh, half double crochet. Okay, I've done 2 half double crochet in each stitch in the third loop around, so I have 12 half double crochet here. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and now I'm going to join with a slip stitch in my first stitch. And we're using the same color on the next round, so don't fasten off. For round 3, chain 1 to get up to the height, and now still working in those third loops only, we're going to work a single crochet chain 1 in each stitch. So find that third loop. On the first stitch it might be a little tight, but find that third loop, single crochet chain 1 in each stitch around. So that'll be 12 single crochets and 12 chains. Join with a slip stitch to finish a round, and then I'm going to pull this loop up big because I want to pause here. This is where it becomes really useful to have stitch markers. And you can either use these kind of stitch markers, or you can even just use some scraps of a different color yarn. What we're going to do is we're going to mark each of these chain spaces around the circle. Remember, there's 12 of them, because once we start the next row, it becomes hard to find the chain spaces because we're going to be working in front of some of them and into some of them, so it becomes a little harder to find them. So it's chain space, stitch, chain space. Go ahead and put a stitch marker in every single chain space, and if you're using a little piece of yarn like this one, you can stick it through. There's the next chain space. You can stick it through and just pull the ends through to make a little temporary knot, just like that. And then we'll pull it out once we no longer need it. So go ahead and mark all your chain spaces that way. all of my chain 1 spaces are marked. There's 12 of them. We're going to use 6 of them in this round, and we're going to remove the markers from the 6 that we use, and we'll leave the markers in the other 6. So first I'm going to slip stitch into this first chain space. So I'm going to be using that one. I'm going to go ahead and remove this stitch marker. So you don't necessarily have to put that first stitch marker in. So I'm slip stitching into the first chain space. Now I'm going to chain 3, which counts as a double crochet, and I'm going to work 6 more double crochet, so a total of 7. All in this same chain space. So that is my first petal. Now I'm going to anchor that down into the row below the one we're working on. Remember when we worked these single crochets, we worked them in the 3rd loop. That leaves the front 2 loops of the row below available to work into still. So I'm going to kind of look underneath this next chain space and see which stitch lines up most closely. To me that looks like this one here. So I'm going to work into this one here, and I'm going to do a single crochet. And that anchors that petal down into that corner. I'm going to skip the chain space that's behind the single crochet I just made. I'm going to go over to the next chain space, remove that marker, and work without chaining. I'm just going to work 7 double crochet in this one. So that pulls the edges of the petals down by making those low single crochets. So that's another petal. Now I skip 1 stitch, so that was the stitch I worked into before. I'm going to skip the next stitch, and I'm going to work my single crochet into the next stitch. I skip the chain space behind the single crochet I just made. I remove the next marker. There we go. And I work my next petal, my 7 double crochets, into this chain space. And we keep doing that around. Skip 1 stitch on the bottom and single crochet in the next one. Skip 1 chain space and work a petal in the next one. So I'm going to do that all the way around. I should have 6 petals when I'm done because I'm working into half of the 12 chain spaces. And then I will come back at the end of the row. I've worked my last single crochet. I have 6 petals and I've removed 6 stitch markers. I still have 6 stitch markers intact for the spaces I didn't work into. I'm leaving those there because we'll need those spaces later. I'm going to join with a slip stitch to the first double crochet, which is the top of that chain 3. And the pattern says to fasten off, but I'm not going to because I'm actually going to do a little trick later so that I have 1 less end to weave in. So for now, I'm just going to pull this loop up and stick a stitch marker in it. And this is just a trick that happens to work in this one spot. It's not something you can use all the time, but when you can use it, it saves you from weaving in an end. Okay, so I'll just let that sit. If it gets in your way or if you don't want to try the little trick that I'm going to show you later, then you can fasten this off like the pattern says. Now we're going to join denim with a slip stitch in the back loop only at the center of one of these petals. So each of these petals has 7 stitches in it. We're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, because that's the center one, and join in the back loop only of this 4th stitch. So here's the front loop, here's the back loop. We're joining in the back loop only. And we're just going to pull up a loop and then basically chain 1, and that is joining with a slip stitch. Okay, now we're going to chain 1 more, which counts as a chain 1 space. Okay, we're going to skip that first stitch that we joined into because our chain 1 space is over that, and we're going to single crochet in the back loop only of each of the next 3 stitches, the next 3 double crochets. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, now we're going to skip over the single crochet that's at the bottom, and we're going to single crochet in each of the next 3 stitches, and we're working in back loops only all the way. Now we're back up to the center stitch again, right? So here we're going to chain 1, and we're going to skip that center 4th stitch just like we did here. okay? And then single crochet in the back loops of the next 3 stitches, skip the single crochet, and single crochet in the back loops of the next 3 stitches. So that's the pattern. We're going to continue that all the way around. Okay, I'm back to the beginning. This was my first stitch, and remember I said it counts as a chain 1 space. So when I join for this space here, I'm going to slip stitch not into the chain itself, but into the space to open up that space a little bit. So there I've slip stitched in the space, and now we basically have a chain 1 space over that stitch that we skipped. Now we're going to take our hook out of this one and secure it with a stitch marker as well. I'm going to steal this stitch marker that I've got in here. There we go. And then we can move on to round 6. Now remember when we did this round, we worked into the chain 1 spaces below, and we didn't work into 6 of them. Like we only worked into 6 and we left the other 6 with markers in them, right? So now we're going to work into those 6. And the pattern said to fasten off B and to join another piece later. I'm going to show you how to continue with this loop. Remember I set the loop aside? I'm going to show you how to continue with this loop instead. So pull the loop up a little bit big, okay? And then come down to the chain space that's directly below it. See, there's that single crochet that we did, and there's the chain space directly below it. We're going to actually pick up this loop in that chain space, and I'm starting from the bottom and going up, right? So I'm kind of pulling it down into that chain space. And then I'm going to chain 1, and now it just is like I joined there, right? It's just the same as if I had joined into that space. So that's how we're going to join, and then we're ready to start round 6. Now, if you did fasten off, or if you don't like the look of that, you totally can fasten off and rejoin into any of these chain spaces. So I'm going to remove this marker because now we're working into this chain space. Now we're basically putting 7 double crochet in each of these chain spaces, but we want to end up in the center of that group of 7. So I'm going to start with a chain 3, and I've already chained 1, so I'm going to count that, and I'm just going to start with 2 more chains, okay? That counts as my first double crochet. Now I want to be in the center of the group of 7, so I'm going to put 3 more double crochet into this same chain space. Notice that I'm pulling the previous layer forward and out of my way because I'm working behind it. So there's 4 double crochet so far in the first chain space. Now in the last round that we did with these petals, we basically did a single crochet between our shells, right? Between each petals. Here we're going to do a chain 1 between instead. So chain 1, find the next marked space. Aren't you glad we used these markers? And we're going to work 7 double crochet into that space. That's 7. Now we chain 1, find the next marked space, and keep doing the same thing all the way around. I'm back to the beginning of the round. I'm doing this last chain 1, and then remember I only worked 4 double crochet so far into there, so I'm going to work 3 more into that same chain space. Oop, 3, there we go. And then I'm going to join with a slip stitch into my first, into the starting chain 3 that I made, so because that counts as my first double crochet, right? Even though it kind of is hidden back there. And then we're ready to move on to round 7. So what we've done is to basically establish a lower layer, a bottom layer of petals underneath this top layer of petals. Now we're going to extend these and make them a little more pointy. So in the next round, we're right in the center here, right? We're going to start with treble crochets to make them a little more pointy. So we're actually going to chain 5, and that counts as a treble and a chain 1. So 4 of these chains count as a treble, and 1 chain counts as a chain 1. If you want, and you totally don't have to do this, but if you find it helpful, you can actually mark that 4th chain with a stitch marker so that you know exactly where to work into when you're joining your round at the end. But that's totally optional, just if you find it helpful. So there are my 5 chains, so 4 chains for a treble and a chain 1 for a chain 1 space, and then I'm going to put another treble right back in that same stitch. Oop. A treble has 2 yarn overs. Insert your hook and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2 3 times. Okay, that's what makes it a treble. And now we have basically a treble, chain 1, treble in that first stitch. Now I'm going to double crochet in each of the next 2 stitches, and then I'm going to skip that last double crochet, and then I'm going to single crochet into this chain 1 space. Now I'm going to skip that first stitch after that chain 1 space, and I'm going to double crochet in each of the next 2 stitches. I'm back up at the top of my 7 double crochet shell here, my petal. So I'm going to put 2 trebles and a chain 1 space. So treble, chain 1, treble. So it's kind of like a treble crochet V-stitch at the top here. It's treble, chain 1, treble. Then 2 double crochets. Skip that double crochet and single crochet into the chain 1 space. Skip the next double crochet and double crochet into the next 2 double crochets. And then I get back to the top and I do that treble, chain 1, treble again. And I'm going to keep doing that all the way around back to where we started. I've worked my last 2 double crochets. I'm back to where I started, and because I put that marker in, I know exactly where to join, and I'm just going to join with a slip stitch into that 4th chain, which is basically the top of my first treble. And I can remove that marker. Let's move on to the next round. For round 8, we want to start in this chain space in the middle. So I'm going to slip stitch into that first space. Now again, we're going to do a chain 5. And again, if you wanted to, you can mark this 4th chain as the top of your first stitch. Whoop. Try not to split the yarn, but it's helpful if you can go under both legs of the stitch so that you can join exactly where the marker is. There we go. So now I know where to join. And now I'm going to do a treble and a double crochet in the same space. So there's my treble, whoop, treble, and there's a double crochet in that same space. Now I'm going to double crochet in the next stitch, which is a treble, right? So I double crochet in the treble, then I'm going to double crochet in the next stitch, which is a double crochet. So basically I've double crocheted in the next 2 stitches, right? I'm skipping the next stitch, and then this time instead of a single crochet, I'm going to put a slip stitch into that single crochet. So it's still this center portion here, that point, and then 2 double crochets, and then this time it's a slip stitch instead of a single crochet. So skip the first one, okay, 2 double crochets, 1, 2, all right, and now in the center here, we're going to do a double, a treble, a chain 1, a treble, and a double. So it's the same thing we did last time, but we've added an extra double on each end of it, right? Then we do 2 doubles. Don't forget this first stitch. It's very easy to think you have to go in there, but you want to get the very first stitch. Okay, double, double. All right, skip the last double and do a single or a slip stitch into the single. Skip the next double and then double, double. Oops. There we go. And we're back up to the top. So I'm going to continue that pattern all the way around and meet you when I'm done with the round. I'm back to the beginning of the round, and I've worked that last double into that treble, but now I didn't quite finish what goes in this chain space, because remember I have treble, chain 1, treble, and then double, right? So I need another double crochet in this chain space. So I'm going to put 1 last double crochet in that chain space, and then I'm going to join right into that 4th chain at the top of what's counting as the first treble. Remove that marker. And I'm actually going to set aside this loop and move on to a different color. So I'm just going to put that marker right back into that loop. So what you can see is that the treble crochets have added kind of a pointiness to these petals. These ones are much more rounded, and these ones with the trebles come to more of a point. So we have our 2 layers of petals. We're going to be picking up this light blue to work with it again for the next round. And technically, according to the pattern, it says to drop this in the front of your work. As you're working around, this isn't going to matter wherever it flops while you're working the next round. But when you get to here, when you come to where this marker, and specifically the important part is this working yarn. When you get to here and you start to work here, make sure that this is coming in front. It only matters when you actually get here because of the working yarn. For the rest of it, it doesn't matter at all. So make sure that when you get to here that you pull this petal forward so that the working yarn is where you want it to be. So let's remove this marker and pick up this loop to start the next round. So the first thing that we're going to do is chain 3, okay, and I already did one there, so I'm counting that as 1. Chain 3 and work 2 more double crochet in the same space. So we're going to end up putting 5 double crochet in each of these spaces, but I want to start in the middle, so chain 3. Now, so chain 3, so 3 double crochet in the first one. Okay, now I need to get to the next chain space, but I want to go behind the petal. So I'm going to do a chain 7. And technically I'm working this chain 7 behind this petal, and I'm then working into the next chain space like this, right? But look what happens when you do that. These other petals aren't anchored to anything and they fall right out. So we don't have to worry about these loose ones because they're gonna pop in and out anyway. So for now, just leave them out of the way, work your chain 7, and we're gonna work right back into that chain space with 5 double crochets. Okay, now I've reached where I would be crossing over this petal that has the yarn attached to it still, right? And I should have put a stitch marker in this to make sure it didn't fall out. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to be crossing over our working petal, I guess is a good way to put it. The petal with the working yarn attached. I'm going to be crossing over that. This is the danger period. You don't want to cross in front of it because then when you go to pick up this yarn, it'll be crossing over your chain loop. So for this petal only, we want to be sure, absolutely sure, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that we cross this chain loop behind the petal and the working yarn. Pull everything forward and cross that chain loop behind it so that the petal is lying in front of the working yarn. So again, there's my chain 7. Here is the petal. Cross the chain 7 behind the petal so that the petal is in front and the working yarn is in front. Okay, so once we know that's behind there, now we can, and the working yarn's the really important part because the rest you can pull through. The ball is harder to pull through. So now we can go back into, I just happen to be at the beginning chain space, but you go into the next chain space now that you're behind there. And in this case, I'm in my beginning chain space, so I need to work 2 more double crochets to make a total of 5. And then I join with a slip stitch to that first one to finish my round. So now look what happened. That petal fell back through, right? But the working yarn is now under this chain loop. So the working yarn has to be under the chain loop. That is the main thing. Everything else can be pulled through later. But that working yarn, if it was not, it would be hard to pull it through, right? You'd have to pull the whole ball through here, which nobody wants to do. So you just want to make sure mainly that the working yarn comes under that chain loop. So that's, I think, how I've written it in the pattern. It was really hard to describe in the pattern. Just make sure that the working yarn of the darker color passes under that chain 7 loop. Now, if it doesn't, no big deal. You can always fasten off there and rejoin. It just means more ends to weave in, but that's the way to do it so that you don't have to do that. Okay, now we can ignore these petals at the back. We have the working yarn that we need in the front, and we can just continue working this layer, and then we'll pull the petals through at the end. Now for the next round, we're actually going to be using the brown color. So I shouldn't have slip stitched with the blue. I should be grabbing the brown color again, this brindle, I believe it's called. Yeah, brindle, and do my slip stitch with the brindle to make sure that I change the colors as neatly as possible. There we go. So now I've changed colors, and for the next round, I'm going to work 2 half double crochet in the same stitch that I'm in. So I chain 1, which does not count as a stitch, and I work 2 half double crochet into that very first stitch. Then I'm going to work a half double crochet in each of the next 2 stitches. 1, 2. Then I'm going to work 3 half double crochet into this chain space. 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to do half double crochets in each of the next 2 stitches. So it's basically half double crochet in all the stitches, but when you get to the top one, you do 3 half double crochet in the top one. So 1, 2, 3. It is 3 half double crochet in each chain space, 3 half double crochet in the top of each shell, and half double crochet in all the other stitches. So half double, right? And then 3 half double in here. Then half double. Don't forget this first stitch. It's easy to miss after a chain space. So half double, and then I'm in the center of my chain of my 5DC, so I do 3 half doubles in that one. And we keep doing that all the way around, and I'll come back to you at the end of the round. Okay, I'm nearly back to the beginning. It's half double, slide that a little bit, there we go, half double, and when I get back to where I started, I've only put 2 doubles or 2 half doubles in that stitch so far, so I need to put in that 3rd half double in that same stitch that I started in, okay, to make the total of 3, and then I go ahead and join with a slip stitch. But now when I join, I'm actually going to change back to the light blue. So the light blue is still right there. I'm just going to switch it back to that denim light blue color for the next round. So we're going to chain 1, and we're going to single crochet in the first stitch. Now we're going to front post treble around the center of these 5 stitches. So the 3rd double crochet, so here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? It's the chain 3 that started it, okay? So we're going to front post treble around that post right there. All right, now we skip the stitch behind the front post treble. So the front post treble counts as that stitch. So it doesn't even say to skip it. I think I put that in the notes. Just anytime you work a post stitch, skip the stitch that's behind it. Okay, so we front post treble there, and we're going to single crochet in the next stitch. All right, again, front post treble in the next one down here. Skip the next stitch, or skip the stitch that's behind it, and single crochet in the next stitch. And this may look like it's not perfectly centered, but it works out just fine, and that's because of the way stitches sit when they're in the round. So we're working a little bit towards the left, which helps counteract the natural shift towards the right. So now I'm going to do another front post treble, and now remember, a treble is 2 yarn overs, and a front post means we go from front to back and back around the front again. So a front post treble, you start with 2 yarn overs, go back to front, front to back, and then back up the front again. Yarn over, pull up a loop, okay? Yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2. So that's a front post treble. Now we skip, we've already worked into this one, we skip the next one, and then in the next stitch over this chain space, we're going to do a single crochet chain 1, single crochet. And if you want, you actually can put your marker into the chain 1 space to make it easier to find later if you want to. This one's not as critical as the others were, but I'm a proponent of using markers as much as you need them. Okay, so now let's go on and do that again for this whole full thing here. Okay, so first we're going to do a front post treble. Then we're going to skip 1 stitch behind the treble, right, behind the front post treble, and then we're going to single crochet in the next stitch. Do another front post treble. Don't work the stitch behind the treble. Do a single crochet in the next stitch. Front post treble, single crochet. Front post treble, single crochet. Front post treble. Okay, skip that one. And the way you know that you're in the right spot is it should always be the last of these 3 stitches should be where you're doing your single crochet, chain 1, single crochet. So the last of this group of 3, not the second one, the last one is where you put that single crochet, chain 1, single crochet. So we keep doing that all the way around, and I'll come back at the end of the round. I finished my last front post treble. I'm going to go ahead and join to the first single crochet that I made. So I'm right in the center here now. And I'm going to stick a stitch marker in this loop because I'm going to set it aside and pick up my dark blue loop, my Solstice Heather color. So that's really the end of the layered section, and now we're going to join the layers together. So you'll notice that we've got these big holes here where the petals from the bottom layer go. Now we're going to pull those petals through one by one. Don't worry if they're still curling a little bit, okay? Make sure you don't catch any tails, shove the tails back through. And this is where it was so important that this yarn was here because you wouldn't be able to pull it through right now otherwise. Sure where that tail is coming from. Okay, so that little tail I'm going to shove through that hole so it's right on the bottom. There we go. Okay, and they'll fall right back out, don't worry. Just try and get them through as well as you can. If it helps you, you can actually pin them to the chain 1 spaces that are up here at each corner. So you could actually take a stitch marker and pin it here if you wanted to, but I'm not going to bother. You can pull them back through again as you need to. So grab this loop that's here and put that back on your hook. Exciting, right? We get to put all the layers together. We're going to be working in all of the chain 1 spaces on the dark blue petals and then all the stitches around here. We're actually not working into these chain 1 spaces. So for right now, we're going to start with a picot to put a nice little point at the tip of this petal. So slip stitch into that chain 1 space, okay? Chain 3, and slip stitch right back into that same chain 1 space. So that makes a nice little picot, and that gives us a point to the end of our petal. Now come back here. And you see this chain 1 space that's back here? We're going to skip that chain 1 space, and instead we're going to work into every single crochet and front post double crochet around until we get to the next chain 1 space. So those chain 1 spaces are really acting as our markers right now. So we're just going to do single crochets in each stitch and each front post and single crochet stitch, every stitch, until we get back around to the next chain 1 space. Now in this case, we want this loop and this working yarn to be behind our work. So ignore those at the back of our work. Yeah, there's the single. This is our join, so we don't work into the join. We skip the join and we work into the single crochet there. Okay, there we go. I've hit a chain 1 space, and they're not the easiest to see, so this is why I said earlier if you wanted to place markers in them, you could. Now I'm going to connect back to this next petal. So I'm going to pull the petal through and then do kind of a simplified picot in the chain 1 space. It's a slip stitch, chain 3, and a slip stitch all in that same space. Now I come back here behind the petal, I skip the chain one space, and I start working into these stitches again. Now I'm back to the start of the round. To join, I can either slip stitch in the same space I started in, or I can do that invisible join that I showed you earlier. Fasten off first, now pull the tail through the first slip stitch at the beginning of the round, and then back down through the last stitch you made. So now our two layers are joined, everything is connected, and we're ready to finish the border. I've picked up this stitch of denim that we left hanging earlier. Since it has to climb up one extra row, I'm going to start with a chain 2 instead of a chain 1. Now half double crochet into this single crochet that's directly in front of the stitch that we picked up. So now half double crochet in every stitch across until the last stitch before the picot. In this last stitch before the picot, we're going to work 2 half double crochet. Push the picot forward, and we're going to work into the stitch that's directly after it. It's very easy to miss this first stitch, so be careful not to skip it. Put 2 half double crochet into this stitch as well. If the picot tries to pop out towards the back, just push it forward again. So there's the second half double crochet, and now we have 2 half double crochet on each side of the picot. Now we're going to half double crochet in each stitch across to the last stitch before the next picot, and repeat that pattern all the way around until you get back to where you started. You should end up with 13 stitches between each of the picots. At the end of the round, we can do that invisible join again because we're done with the denim color. So fasten off, pull the tail through the next stitch, and then back down into the center of this stitch. And with half double crochets, I like to catch that third loop as well. For the last round, I want to pick up the brown again. But if we pick it up from right here where we dropped it, it will leave a long strand of yarn going across the back of the work over the last couple of rounds. I'm making this into a bag, so the back isn't going to show, and I'm not particularly worried about it. Even if the back was going to show, I could probably cover up that strand using the tail of this denim color when I'm weaving in the tails. But if you want a really clean look at the back, you could also fasten off the brown and join it again for this last round. Whichever way you do it, join the brown with a slip stitch in any stitch. Now remember, we had 13 stitches in each section on our last round. In this round, we're going to do 6 increases, 1 in each section. So everywhere we had 13 stitches, we're going to turn it into 14. So work 2 single crochet in the first stitch, then 1 single crochet in each of the next 12 stitches. Now repeat that, 2 single crochet in the next stitch, and then single crochet in each of the next 12 stitches. And continue doing that all the way around. That was the last stitch, and we're going to do 1 more invisible join to finish the mandala. And that's how you make this layered flower mandala. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up, share it with your friends, or leave me a comment. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel for more great videos. Thanks for watching!